Well, you died laughing, didn't you?
Yeah. So, of course, they never produced the board. And, of course, Mike and Jack could have turned out as beautiful little Casper stories as anybody. After all, they were trained storymen, and Mike Myers had been a storyman at Disney's. But they said, we're just going to show the front office what it means for us to do a Casper story. And, of course, the front office never asked them to do a Casper story again. But Mike Myers, speaking about him, Mike was one of these guys who talks dirty, but it doesn't sound dirty when he talks, you know that type? And so it's just one of these things he automatically does, and it sounds almost sanitary when he's talking that way. But when he was working the storyman at Disney's, I guess they didn't have tape back in those days, but they'd have a court reporter sitting there at the story conferences and typing up everything that was said at the story conference, verbatim. And then they would type it up and put it on Walt's desk for his review the next morning, so so they wouldn't lose any stray idea that might be pertinent to what they could build on. And Walt would read down that thing and come to the paragraph where Mike is talking, and it would shock him. And Mike would say, "My God, Mike." Walt would say, "My God, Mike, can't you clean up your language?" But I don't think Mike could ever clean up his language. It wouldn't be him.
Wow. Well, when you were there at Famous, you worked there for a few years?
Yes, I did.
And at this same time, didn't you do some early commercial work? You worked for Seamus Culhane?
Well, that was after I left Famous. I went to Culhane. See, I was a pioneer in TV commercials before I went to work for Famous. I was part of a young group that made all the mistakes that everybody else benefited by. We had a little place called East Coast Film, and we didn't know nobody knew what to charge for it, and we tried to put too many scenes in it, and we trained a young staff to work with us. It was up in New Rochelle, and we just furnished all the small studios in New York were furnished with people who were trained in our place. And eventually, I went to work for Famous, and then I came out of Famous and went to work for Seamus Culhane.
And Seamus Culhane was one of the first animators to do commercials strictly for television, right?
Well, I don't know whether he was, but he was one that brought a quality to it. Seamus was a legend in the business. He was the one who animated the hi-ho sequence in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which is still considered one of the great tour de forces of animation. He had 7 characters, all walking differently, and it was really a thing. Now, there was a bit that Seamus put in there. He had Dopey at the end of the line, and Dopey kept trying to keep in step, and he worked out this kind of skip, this little hop, and he incorporated that, and Walt liked it so much that he decided that they'd use it all through the film. So all the other animators had to put that skip on Dopey, and they all said to Culhane, "You just had to do it, didn't you? You just had to do it."
There was a lot of Disney animators that you kept running into over and over again, right? When you were in Mexico, didn't you run into some Mexican artists that worked?
Well, there was, down in Mexico there was Carlos Rodriguez and Rudy Zamora and Ernie Therese, but when I decided when I was 10 years old that I saw Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs when I was 10 years old, and that decided me the career I wanted to be. I had to be in animation. And when I was 19, I went to work at Disney's. I would not necessarily have followed that I'd be working with the people who worked on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but 10 years later, there I was among them. Of course, some of them had moved along, but I caught up with them all down the line. In New York, I worked with Bill Teitla and with Al Euster, and then later with Culhane. And then when I went to Colorado Springs to set up the division of cell animation for the Alexander Film Company, which at that time was the world's largest maker of short-length advertising film for theater and TV, over on the stage was Dave Hand, who had been, of all the names on Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, the biggest name is Walt, and the next biggest name is David Hand. He was the top director on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, so I really, besides Walt, I went all the way to the top.
And back down again. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how the Bullwinkle episode in your life came about, and maybe you could talk a little bit about what it was like working on that film or on those films.
Well, I fell in love with Bullwinkle the first time I saw it. I saw it. It was everybody kept talking about Bullwinkle as a Saturday morning show. Bullwinkle was never a Saturday morning show, unless it was after it went into syndication. Some of the independents showed it on Saturday morning, but Bullwinkle was an after-school thing, and I fell in love with that show the first time I ever laid eyes on it. Well, what happened was I was working at Tex Henson, and a guy named Dick Tompkins came through the place. There was some kind of conference in the States, and Dick Tompkins had a studio in Mexico, and I got talking to him, and he was telling me that the Bullwinkle show was down there, and he began to mention some of the people who were working on the Bullwinkle show, and they were all buddies of mine, guys I'd worked with on both coasts. So I wrote a letter, and first thing you know, I'm invited to go down and join the Bullwinkle show. Now, the reason I was hired is because those guys from the coast were a bunch of specialists. The show was running behind, was a month late, and nobody knew what to do about it. Whereas out in the middle part of the country, where we had to do everything, I had a complete hold on the techniques of production, plus I could animate. So that's why I was hired. I was hired to put that show on schedule. And so I went down to Mexico, and I had the title of being the assistant to the production manager, and my job was to put the show on schedule. And after a year, I had it on schedule, and I was sent home. But then I was called back down for another studio to do commercials for the States.
And those are what'd you work on those commercials?
Well, Trix Rabbit, we did all the Trix Rabbit commercials for the States. Plus, we were opened up for the Mexican market. We were doing stuff for American Airlines and for Del Monte Foods and Alfombras Mohawk, that's Mohawk rugs, and Colgate, which is Colgate. I asked the product was Colgate, and we call it, and the Mexicans call it Colgate, and I said, and the Mexicans are very big on nombre proprio, the proper name, and I said, well, what are you going to do when Senor Colgate comes down? You going to call him Senor Colgate? And they said, no, he's going to be Senor Colgate, but the product is Colgate. So.
So did you ever do a Trix Rabbit commercial where Trix ate Trix cereal until he just got sick and just passed out?
Never happened.
He never actually ate the cereal.
No, and I'll tell you, there's a story about this, that, you see, one year when they were having the national elections, they decided that they would hold a vote on the box. The kids could vote whether the Trix Rabbit would get the Trix. See, in all the commercials, there was always Silly Rabbit, Trix are for kids, and the rabbit never gets a box of Trix. So now the kids get to vote for that. And to kick that off, we did a minute commercial. Most of the commercials were 30 seconds, but we did a minute commercial to kick off that thing. Now, we know how the kids are going to vote. So we did I think it was 3 episodes about the campaign. While the national elections are going on. Now, we don't know what kind of response they're going to get, but we have to be ready in case we are forced to pay off. And of course, when the rabbit gets the Trix, that's the end of the gag, right? So we did a storyboard in which the rabbit had won the election, and the kid says, "Here, rabbit, you win. You get the box of Trix," and the rabbit takes the box of the kid. Says, "But after that's gone, there won't be any more." And the rabbit can't bring himself to eat the Trix. Now he's got it. He can't eat it, and we end up with him. The moon is up, and he's on the lawn having a tantrum, and he's still got the box. He can't bring himself to open the box. Now, but we never produced that spot. We had it ready in case we had to pay off. But what they did, as soon as the national elections were over, they dropped the campaign and went immediately to the next premium, and so it never came up. So we never had to produce that storyboard. But we were ready in case they called it on us.
Now,